Crimea is under attack, Aksionov is hiding in a bunker, dozens of missiles are striking Feodosia, and the Crimean bridge is in the crosshairs. The Guar sank the only ferry near Kerch capable of transporting rail cars. Attack on Luhansk. The so-called LNR has been left without gasoline. All the oil refineries are burning. Buffer zone in Vinnytsia region. Russia is launching an offensive from the territory of Transnistria. There will be no celebration. The Kremlin cancels the May 9th parade due to the threat of Ukrainian ballistic missiles. A high-ranking Putin official has been eliminated in the Zaporizhzhia region. Petersburg for Petersburgers. Russian chauvinists are attacking women and children from Buryatia. A Ukrainian counteroffensive near Kramatorsk. Several villages have been retaken with dozens of occupying soldiers captured. There will be no elections. Orban imposes in Hungary a state of emergency. This is a catastrophe. The Kadyrov family is leaving Chechnya due to flooding. Lukashenko has given the order. Belarus is entering the war. Trump announces the end of the war, but Iran ignores the ceasefire and strikes American bases. Meanwhile, the Kremlin is preparing an invasion of the moon for 4.5 trillion rubles. All this coming up in just a few seconds. But right now, like this video and subscribe to the channel Ukraine Today so you don't get lost on YouTube. Let's begin. Ukraine has delivered a powerful strike on the largest oil depot in occupied Crimea. Our drones attacked the Feodosia marine oil terminal. This is the largest Russian oil depot on the occupied peninsula. For context, up to 250,000 tons of fuel are stored there, which supplies the army and navy. On the night before April 8th, residents of Feodosia reported hearing the sounds of drones, a series of explosions, and a fire. The scale of this fire could be seen from more than 20 kilometers away. This is already the third strike by the Ukrainian armed forces on the base. Last time, the fire could not be extinguished for several days. It looks like our forces are finishing off this base for good. Russians, what's with your faces? How are you singing now? Let the war end.
Let this long war finally end, as that would be much better than living your whole life without any sleep, under a dark and bloody cloud.
But that's not all. Special forces of the main intelligence directorate neutralized the occupiers' last railway ferry in Kerch. On the night of April 6th, Ukrainian drones convinced the ferry Slavyanin not to return to service anymore. This was the last operational railway ferry of the occupiers' army in the Kerch Strait. Also on the night of April 8th, Ukrainian armed forces drones visited the temporarily occupied territory of Luhansk region. There were numerous strikes there. And
what's located there?
RPZ down.
Holy no one is shooting.
Everyone sometimes feels a bit down at times.
Reading the comments under previous episodes, I see that many people watch us from Europe, Kazakhstan, Moldova, and even the USA. We Ukrainians are grateful to you for your support and proud that we have such sensible viewers. Write in the comments under this episode which country you're watching us from and whether people there support our struggle against the empire. I always enjoy reading your comments, and in the meantime, let's continue with the most interesting part. Russia is planning to create a buffer zone in the Vinnytsia region from the side of the unrecognized Transnistria. However, the aggressor does not have the strength to do this. This was stated by the deputy head of the office of the President of Ukraine, Pavlo Polisa. According to him, Russia's plans include creating buffer zones in the Kharkiv, Sumy, and Chernihiv regions, establishing conditions for an attempt to seize Zaporizhzhia and Kherson regions, as well as, in the long term, the implementation of aggressive ambitions to capture the Mykolaiv and Odessa regions. Assessing the possibility of Russian troops capturing Donbass, he noted that in the near future, the Russians will not be able to reach the administrative borders of Donetsk region. He cited statistics for the first quarter of 2026 within the Donetsk region. From the partially Lyman to the Oleksandrivka direction, there are 316 killed and wounded for every 1 square kilometer captured. Compared to the main offensive directions last year, these figures have almost doubled, and the average losses along the line of contact in Donbass have nearly tripled. According to him, statements about capturing Donbass are used by Russia as a negotiation tactic at a time when it itself feels that the situation is not turning in its favor. The Gauleiter of the occupied part of Zaporizhzhia region, Yevgeny Balitsky, also made a tragic statement. Two,
Our regret during the evacuation of children. Our comrade, the first deputy head of the Kamyanka-Dniprovska municipal district, Alexander Olegovich Tereznichenko, died at the school.
in reality, this is about the elimination of a high-ranking official of the occupation administration in Kamyanka-Dniprovska. But, as is customary in Russia, in such cases they have already come up with a convenient story, how the criminal heroically saved children and died during a great mission. But we know how it really happened. In reality. Now to the situation at the front. In the Kramatorsk direction, Ukrainian units continue their counteroffensive. They have already cleared several enemy strongholds. In the settlements of Khalipivka and Fedorivka too. Also in this direction, the Ukrainian armed forces drove the Russians out of their positions and entered Nikiforivka. Currently, fighting is taking place directly in the settlement. At the same time, in the Kupiansk direction, paratroopers of the 77th Separate Airmobile Brigade carried out precise strikes on camouflaged positions and enemy personnel of the Russian army. Simultaneously, partisans from the Atesh movement also carried out successful sabotage operations in the Kupiansk direction. Relay cabinets on the railway were damaged, which paralyzed train movement and disrupted the supply of ammunition and provisions to the occupiers. In the Zaporizhzhia direction, our strike drones incinerated a warehouse containing Russian UAVs. Just look at what's left of that warehouse. And in the Kharkiv region, Ukrainian border guards spectacularly destroyed a shelter and Russian positions in underground hideouts. I never cease to admire the courage and heroism of Ukrainian soldiers. They hold the front and stand against a massive horde that vastly outnumbers them. That's why I urge you to support the armed forces of Ukraine, and if you can't do so financially, write them words of encouragement in the comments. I know they're watching us. The situation around a possible war between the US and Iran changed at a dizzying pace in just 12 hours. On the evening of April 7th, President Donald Trump made loud threats. He declared that an entire civilization would perish that night and it would never be restored. This was how he commented on the expiration of the ultimatum he had given Iran to open the Strait of Hormuz and sign an agreement with the US. At the same time as these statements, American media speculated that Trump might decide to use nuclear weapons. Axios reported that he threatened to destroy all bridges and power plants in Iran by midnight, as well as to take other actions with devastating consequences for the country, not ruling out the risk of war crimes. At the same time, a Pentagon spokesperson noted that the department is skeptical about the likelihood of further escalation. This skepticism within the American government is also related to the risks of a possible impeachment of Trump due to his threats. In Iran, the statement about possible strikes on critical infrastructure sparked a massive response. People formed human chains at strategic sites, trying to prevent US attacks. This looked impressive, however, it irritated Trump, who accused the Iranian authorities of using civilians. Tehran, in turn, rejected the ultimatum and demanded an end to the strikes and the lifting of sanctions. Later, Pakistan intervened in the situation. The country's prime minister proposed a ceasefire plan. The White House told CNN that a response would be given after the president is fully briefed on the details of the initiative. As a result, Trump made a statement in a different tone. He agreed to suspend the bombings of Iran for 2 weeks on the condition of the immediate unblocking of the Hormuz Strait. Iran confirmed its readiness for a ceasefire. They put forward their own conditions. According to a preliminary agreement, peace talks may begin in Pakistan around April 10th. According to Trump, he received a 10-point proposal from Iran, which he considers a workable basis for dialogue. Moreover, this statement was made just an hour before his ultimatum expired. However, it seems that the ceasefire did not last long, as yesterday Israel delivered powerful strikes on more than 100 command centers within just 10 minutes, and on a Hezbollah military facility in Lebanon. In addition, the US and Israel also struck an Iranian oil refinery on Lavan Island in the Persian Gulf. In response, Iran is striking targets in Kuwait, Bahrain, and the United Arab Emirates. Viktor Orban may declare a state of emergency in Hungary and postpone the parliamentary elections. Details in our report.
Viktor Orban continues to disrupt elections in Hungary. The story about Ukraine allegedly blowing up the gas pipeline didn't work, so now they're betting on declaring a state of emergency in the country and postponing the vote. Meanwhile, even US Vice President J.D. Vance has already flown in to support Orban in his pre-election agony. By the way, this is the first time in Hungary's history. He also tried to rally the remaining undecided voters. He took the side of the incumbent prime minister, speaking at a rally in his support. Analysts believe that this could partially work.
It's also exceptionally fascinating and noteworthy to see to what extent this constantly shifting and wavering electoral landscape will endorse and actively support President Trump's vision of Orban continuing his work as prime minister. Because, for example, it has been widely observed and frequently noticed by analysts that there has already been a precedent when last year the United States supported Javier Milei in Argentina. That was during the midterm parliamentary elections, and he strengthened his position.
However, Orban is getting much more help from Moscow. There they are ready not just to campaign but to take action. Analysts say the result was the story involving an attempt to sabotage a gas pipeline. And now efforts are being made to undermine the elections as a whole.
The arsenal could be quite extensive. The question is this: how much does Hungarian society trust all of this? If we see that many of these things are obviously fabricated, it becomes very apparent. Considering that Russian political strategists are also working for Orban's campaign, and given that his lead is increasing rather than decreasing, this is also quite telling.
Orban sees the polling data as well, so with each passing day he only becomes more dangerous, experts explain. He has little left to lose, and with only a few days remaining in office, the Hungarian Prime Minister's team may resort to any extremes.
For Orban, these elections are a matter of life and death. During all the time he has been in power, considering that basically it was probably hard for him to imagine that he would ever be replaced. He obviously became less vigilant, and many people are talking about
the very real prison terms that Orban could face for all the schemes he carried out while in office. First and foremost,
those connected to funding from the Kremlin. Bloomberg has added another example to Orban's collection of sycophantic acts toward Moscow. Journalists reviewed a transcript of a conversation between Orban and Putin, in which Viktor stated that he was ready to make every effort to help Putin with the war in Ukraine. He even compared himself to the mouse from the fable that helps the lion escape from its cage. According to the transcript, this remark made Putin laugh. And this information obviously has further tanked Orban's approval rating.
Prominent sociologists in Hungary are already beginning to observe and state that this essentially means that in Hungary there will not only be a simple change of leadership or just a new prime minister, but also a fundamental change of the entire political and social framework that Orban has carefully built over the last 16 years.
Some analysts also believe that the increased interest of the United States in Hungary is further evidence of this. Given the agreements with Washington on the purchase of liquefied natural gas, Vance's visit may be an attempt by the US to secure these contracts. Regardless of whether there is a change of power in the country,
Trump, who also takes a critical stance toward the European Union, has decided to occupy the niches that were previously held by Russia. Therefore, I do not rule out the scenario that if the Hungarian government changes, this mechanism for increasing the supply of alternative energy resources from the United States will remain in place. Instead of those that were supplied from Russia, it will be preserved. This is especially important given the current situation. Due to the conflict in the Middle East, the prices of oil and gas are rising.
As for ordinary citizens, it seems that they have finally understood everything. The promises made by the then young Orban and the Fidesz party more than a decade and a half ago have never become reality. And in some respects, the situation has only gotten worse.
Especially when it comes to the rule of law and human rights. We know that the judges reform there is completely, the judicial reform is paused. The human rights reform there is also currently facing serious criticism. And today, among all 27 countries of the European Union in terms of corruption, well, Hungary is in last place.
Hungarians who know about corruption firsthand now have a chance to change their lives. But whether they will want this, we will see on April 12th.
Putin is clearly afraid of Ukrainian ballistic missiles. The aerial part of the Victory Madness parade on May 9th in Moscow has been cancelled. This news is now being actively discussed by Z bloggers on propaganda broadcasts.
The aerial part of the parade has been cancelled, completely cancelled, in fact.
The threat is growing not from drones, which, as we all know, we are dealing with quite successfully and so on. The threat from ballistic missiles is increasing. Yes, or from cruise missiles.
Russians, you understood everything correctly. The threat of ballistic missiles is growing for you. So the traditional parade in Moscow and St. Petersburg is being cancelled. Now it will be, so to speak, significantly changed.
The rehearsal that was supposed to take place has been cancelled. You were summoned by the senior parade commander. Each parade unit, those people marching there, has a senior officer. They arrive there from different parts of the country. That is, of course, there are people from Moscow, from the Moscow region, and from other cities as well. And from all, so to speak, of the Russian Federation. The servicemen who arrived to participate in the parade were summoned and informed that they should pack their things and, on Monday, that is tomorrow, depart for their permanent duty stations. Permanent duty stations. At the same time, so to speak, until further notice.
And once again about those very Ukrainian missiles that so frightened the Kremlin. As the Z bloggers themselves write, cruise missiles can reach Moscow in half an hour and ballistic missiles in just 10 minutes. In recent months, Ukraine has indeed announced not only the development, but also the use of its long-range missiles. For example, the results of the Flamingo cruise missiles' work have already been felt by the Russians more than once. As for the FP-9 ballistic missile with a range of 850 kilometers, just enough to reach Moscow, with an 800-kilogram warhead, according to the chief designer, the missile is already being prepared for testing. The nervousness in the Kremlin is quite justified. Lukashenko is helping Putin in his terror against Ukrainians. At least 4 sites for launching UAVs are being built on the territory of Belarus, which will allow enemy drones to reach Ukrainian cities much faster.
Putin's regime is preparing a new staging ground for strikes against Ukraine, this time on the territory of Belarus.
There can be no peaceful time, Pavel. We are preparing for war.
Moscow plans to deploy bases for long-range drones in Belarus, a move that could drastically reduce the response time of Ukrainian air defense and shift the balance of threats.
Belarus has never been as ready for war as it is today. In all 31 years of Lukashenko's rule, he has never invested so much in the development of the military sphere in Belarus.
And the numbers speak for themselves. Just in the past week, Russia has launched about 400 long-range drones and dozens of missiles at Ukraine. The main strike targeted civilian infrastructure. There are fatalities and dozens of wounded.
Putin is incapable of taking action, the Putin occupation army. They are unable to carry out any offensive operations. There is none and no potential for it. The Putin army has no capability for offensive actions, and Putin is his command has completely shifted to striking at
the peaceful cities of Ukraine.
And this is only part of a broader strategy following the massive attack. On March 24th, the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, confirmed that Moscow is preparing for a new phase of escalation.
We have clear information that Russia is planning further deployment of ground stations to control long-range drones, both in the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine and at 4 stations on the territory of Belarus. We will respond accordingly.
If earlier Belarus was used as a convenient corridor for war, now the masks are off. Minsk is getting deeper and deeper involved in the conflict, turning from a transit territory into a full-fledged Russian staging ground for strikes against Ukraine. Since 2022, troops have already entered from here, missiles have been launched, and the offensive on Kiev began. And apparently the mustachioed dictator is now openly ready to put Belarus directly in the line of fire. For Ukraine, these are new risks, and the key factor here is distance. The shortest distance from Kiev to the Russian border, 200 to 250 kilometers. This is time that works in favor of Ukrainian air defense. But if launch positions appear in Belarus, the distance will be reduced to about 100 kilometers. And that means less time for detection, less time to react, and a much higher risk of breaking through the air defense. And in this configuration, not only Ukraine comes under threat, the risks are rapidly approaching NATO's borders.
Russia is a destroyed civil society that is simply focused solely on war and only on war. Russia and its current leadership can certainly exist successfully. Of course, we can talk about the ongoing war, but naturally all international experts are completely unanimous in their professional opinion. Russia will be absolutely incapable and entirely unable to wage any significant or large-scale war against its neighbors or any other major powers for the foreseeable future. The United European Forces.
The only thing Putin is capable of today is destabilization. But even that is already becoming difficult for them. At the same time, against the backdrop of failures at the front, the Kremlin is betting on what it does best: intimidation. And in this strategy, Belarus becomes a key instrument, a platform from which pressure can be increased and the zone of threat expanded. Meanwhile, Roscosmos has completely lost its mind. Again. In 2020, Rogozin stated that he would not allow the privatization of the moon, supposedly just for development. We,
of course, will land our own cosmonauts there when we begin flight tests of our super heavy rocket in 28, together with this spacecraft. But I'll say it again, not to conquer the moon, but to use the moon as a space testing ground for developing technologies that we will need for work on other celestial bodies.
The year 2026, and in Russia they announce plans to claim a piece of the moon. They want their own territory there too, and they will spend money on it. 4.5 trillion rubles. But let's not forget, this is Russia, which means it's not a scientific breakthrough, but a brilliant opportunity to write off money. But no one is going to check, and the money will be written off nicely.
Funding needs to be allocated, as I understand it.
It would be better if they allocated funding for houses in Taganrog. Or does Putin believe that the way Russians live is already out of this world?
Everything is falling apart, everything is collapsing. It would be better to reinforce the shore here, to do everything properly. So much extra land would be added.
Taganrog, the old district, Bogodonia, all of this is collapsing too. Well, people are suffering, especially those who live closer to the shore. The Liberal government has decided that for once, something will be done. But when that will actually happen, no one knows yet.
It seems even nature is taking revenge on modern Putin's Russia. Back at the end of March, there was a massive flood in the North Caucasus. In Dagestan and Chechnya, houses, roads, bridges, and cars were swept away. Thousands of people were left without electricity, heat, or communication. While the authorities declared a state of emergency and promised compensation and new housing, residents were pulling each other out of the water. The evacuated neighbors rescued children, livestock, and whatever little else could still be saved. Now we'll tell you all the details of what's happening at this very moment. Dagestan, nature's revenge or complete indifference from the Russian authorities?
That's the kind of disaster we're facing. It's the 21st century.
For more than 10 days now, Dagestan and Chechnya have been unable to recover from the aftermath of record rainfall since March 28th. And it's not that the governments are doing nothing, they just have an ironclad excuse. It's a natural disaster. It's not our fault, but as always, everything is under control. Or so it seems, just another report for Putin.
As of this very moment, the situation in Dagestan continues to be firmly managed by all relevant government bodies.
Meanwhile, in the Republic, there is no electricity, no water, and no communication. And poor Russians are forced to help themselves.
Help us evacuate our people. Our Kamaz trucks, many of them are stuck, they can't get out.
Then of course there are the inevitable naive video appeals from residents to the authorities. It turns out such abnormal precipitation isn't even a reason to declare a state of emergency yet. I wonder why that is.
They explicitly stated that there was absolutely no immediate requirement to implement an emergency response at this particular moment. Some, however, disagreed.
In their formally documented official reports, they explicitly categorized themselves as originating from or residing within those specific areas, where a state of emergency has been officially and publicly declared.
Ah, so that's what it's about. About receiving some surely financial assistance.
In fact, all sorts of mechanisms are included there, including, for example, if the property was insured, then this can be considered as force majeure, and so on and so forth. That is, this needs to be looked at separately. Why are the authorities afraid of the announcement? State of emergency or emergency situation, even.
Meanwhile, in the Kremlin itself, there is still silence. But it's not surprising. Putin probably hoped to just wait it out. But that wasn't the case. The dam at the Kizuz reservoir also burst. So to speak, here you go, sign for it. The Kakovka boomerang. But apparently what surprised the head of Dagestan and the mayor of Makhachkala the most was the destroyed house, because that's exactly what they came to see. But what's most interesting is the allocation of the budget to the region. After all, 3 years ago, the head of Dagestan happily announced the news about the largest amount of funding being allocated: 12.5 billion rubles. But where did that money go? It certainly wasn't spent on strengthening and modernizing the city.
Nothing was done. Accordingly, if anything was done at all, it was only on paper. This means, once again, the money ended up in the pockets of officials, and in reality, the region was absolutely unprepared for the critical situation that developed. In other words, nothing at all. Neither the storm drains were repaired, nor was the dam reinforced. In short, nothing was done.
Well, whatever. So what if some residents' houses were destroyed? But critical infrastructure, surely that's a completely different matter. Or is it not? At the substations that supply almost half of Makhachkala, it seems no action was taken there either. They could have at least surrounded them with sandbags, if nothing else.
Everything in today's Russia is done, partner, through the wrong end. Yeah, let's not name it outright. Everyone knows which one. Through the ass. Because the authorities are concerned exclusively with the war, and all the money goes to the war. Plus, they're a bit preoccupied with restricting the spread of information and shutting down the internet. Those are the two things the authorities care about. As we've said many times before, Putin doesn't care about people at all.
Putin woke up, or maybe he was just pretending to be asleep this whole time. The master of the Kremlin has finally turned his attention to Dagestan, and quite seriously too. He received reports over the phone about the situation in the region.
Why now? That's actually clear, because this is the second time it's happened and there have been casualties, so we had to at least say something somewhere. And as they say, if this really does lead to the resignation of the head of Dagestan, then it's a kind of warming up of public opinion, showing that Putin is here, Putin is vigilant, he's supposedly in charge. If you thought he was hiding under a log in a bunker, that's not the case.
And the point here is not nature's revenge for the bloody war unleashed against Ukraine, but that the system itself is incapable of handling even the most basic tasks. Where there should be oversight and accountability, there is corruption and indifference.
When the authorities are completely independent from the people, they have no interest in responding in a timely manner because the authorities believe that nothing depends on these very people. And only when the problem becomes significant from a PR perspective, they are forced to respond. In one way or another, they really have to find a way to respond to the situation at the very least. This is how Putin responded. In
the end, any downpour or flood once again turns into a catastrophe that could have been prevented. But time and again, the authorities do nothing to prevent it. Simply because, in essence, they just don't care.
Under Russia's cultural capital, St. Petersburg, Russian chauvinist women attacked Buryat mothers with strollers. This happened in broad daylight, right on the street.
You'd be better off somewhere in the outskirts of Russia. You're not a real nation, you're not Russian. You're not Slavic women, you're taking over us. Do you know that Russia, this is—
Where are we? This place is called Kuznets. You're clearly not Slavic women.
Girls, you are in Russia. What are you guys? Learn
the geography of Russia.
Learn social intelligence. I'm a certified specialist. And right now, you're embarrassing yourself by—
And now, the most interesting part. The one who was the most aggressive, supposedly truly Russian, turned out not to be local, but actually from the Orenburg region. And this isn't the first time she's shown her racist behavior. Here's a clear example of what racism looks like, thriving in a pseudo-empire. That's all for now. Please like this video and don't forget to subscribe to our channel, Ukraine Today, so you don't miss our upcoming episodes. See you next time.